Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cybersecurity Liability Errors and Omissions Insurance. I'm Amber Noble, a marketing specialist at Barracuda MSP, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session. Today, I'm joined by Justin Reinmuth, president of Techrug. Justin brings with him over a decade of experience working in insurance-related endeavors, focused specifically on a comprehensive errors and omissions solution aimed at small and medium-sized IT companies. During today's educational webinar, Justin will take us through the necessary insuring agreements an MSP must have in place, exclusions to be mindful of, and what your clients must do on their end to stay protected. Before we get started, let's do some brief housekeeping. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to share them using the questions or chat panels to the right of the Zoom webinar screen. At the conclusion of the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief polling survey. Please take a moment to tell us what you think so we can continually improve the content and quality of our online events. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Justin to begin today's presentation. Take it away, Justin.
Hey, Amber, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone, especially with the beginning of the year getting started, hopping on this call. I just wanted to go over, I'm not going to take a lot of time because, again, I'm mindful that people are extremely busy starting up the new year. But, a lot of not only people come to Techrug, but I know in talking with Sarah at Barracuda, a lot of MSPs out there, as their cybersecurity practice continues to grow, they want to make sure that they've got the necessary coverages in the event of a claim, that they've got the correct insurance that will respond to a situation. And then I just wanted to tackle some exclusions that you want to be careful of, and just talk with you a little bit about cyber insurance and the importance for your clients to carry the coverage. So with that being said, like I said, I'm gonna get started here and just kind of want to go over this screen, and I'm sure, as a lot of you guys are aware, over the next 4 or 5 years, the managed service market is going to explode. I can tell you from our end, probably we got 1,100 clients, and I would say, 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10, that we get in for renewal applications, they're growing. So, and in a pretty good clip. And again, that's just kind of where the industry is at. So, as that continues to grow and our IT companies and MSPs are making more and more money, there's also, more and more exposure. So, there's a lot of articles out there in the insurance industry that talks about how, losses from these major cyber attack could rival, the damage from a major hurricane. And I can tell you, just in the last 6 months, we've had 2 of our MSP clients targeted because of the data that they have access to, and we're seeing that more and more. I would say I haven't had 2 in the last, probably year, and I had 2 in 6 months. And the latest one was actually just came on Monday, where an MSP, I hope I'm saying it right because it was new to me, but the Ryuk, R-Y-U-K ransomware. Anyways, they were on the West Coast, and they had gotten hit on Sunday night going into Monday morning, and it shut down 5 of their clients. And we obviously had to get our team of forensics and people on the phone, because in order to get the ransomware reversed, they wanted 20 Bitcoin, which I think with the conversion was somewhere around $75,000. So back in August, we had another MSP that had gotten targeted as well. It was a $100,000 ransom. So again, we're just seeing more and more people on this call. Firms like yourself are getting targeted because of the amount of information and the sensitive data that you guys have access to. So before I got into a couple of the insurance agreements that there's kind of 5 major that you want to make sure that you've got on your policy. I just kind of wanted to go over some risk management techniques. We every year kind of sit down and go over what we think are some of the most successful IT companies and kind of what they have in place and why they tend to, not turn in as many claims. And so after crunching the numbers, we found 3 things that, majority of them had in common. The first one is what we're going to call protection. Okay. So what this means is that if you've got a client that's too cheap to take out the proper backup, make sure you're getting some sort of waiver letter. I'm sure any of us that go to a doctor here, when we go in and we need to do a surgery, we don't tell the doctor how to do the surgery, right? The surgeon, is going to tell us how the surgery needs to be done. And that's true with your clients. If you feel like a client, needs to go through or has to have some sort of, certain protections in place, whether it's security or backup, then you need to make sure that you are offering that to them. And if they don't, take your advice, that some sort of waiver letter or denial of services letter is being signed. Because, and I can tell you, there's probably been instances over the last several years where 10 or 15 times, our MSPs will tell a client, hey, you've got to do X. And the client just doesn't want to do it. And then 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half later, X happens. And then the MSP will say to the client, well, we told you that if you didn't address this, this could happen. And the client will say, well, you didn't tell me that. So, when it comes down to these types of claims, documentation is extremely important. So if you've got a client that just doesn't want to follow your advice because they don't want to make the investment or something like that, make sure that you're getting some sort of waiver letter or again, denial of service letter signed. The second thing, and it is insurance. If things do go wrong, you want to make sure that you've got the proper insurance in place to protect you. These cyber E&O policies are going to provide you with defense, and they're also going to provide you with payout. So, a typical policy, most people will start out $1 million. And what we're finding, especially in certain states or, MSPs that are working in maybe healthcare or tightly regulated industries, even $1 million isn't enough anymore. So, once our clients get to, maybe over $1 million in revenues and they're working in certain industries, or if they're in certain states, they're now making the jump up to $2 million because, again, $1 million just doesn't get you as far as it used to. And then the third thing is contracts. So, making sure that you're utilizing contracts is going to be, extremely important. What it does is it's not going to keep away usually the big claims, because they're going to go in, and if there's enough damage on their end, your clients, they're going to hire an attorney to go through your contract, find holes, or it could be a situation where we'll get into one of these insuring agreements where you potentially breach the contract, so the contract's out the window. But what the contracts do is it keeps kind of away the nuisance claims. So, if there's a claim or a situation where, it could be a $20,000 or $30,000, claim that could potentially be filed, or situation that could be filed against you, we find that, if your client has an attorney look at it and they say, well, gosh, it's in the contract that they're not responsible, or they limited their liability, it will keep those $25,000 and $30,000 claims from coming through. And I know on our end, before we were a little bit more stringent on contracts, before we made that such a strong sticking point in getting qualified for the Techrug program, we would probably get 10 to 15 of these nuisance claims a year. And so if you're at $20,000, you're looking at $350,000 of claims that we shouldn't have been into. So I would think for everyone on this call, if you're doing, we call it PIC, but if you're doing protection, insurance, and contracts, you're in pretty good hands. So with that, I want to kind of focus on this, the E&O policy, and why everyone came for the call today. So, E&O policies, I maybe set myself up here, but true or false, are E&O policies the same? And the answer is going to be false. And that's what I'm going to say is probably the number one misconception. We will get a lot of times where clients will come to us and they'll say, hey, I've got cyber E&O, and would you mind taking a look at it? And then when they send it to us, we'll find out that, a client doesn't have either certain components of a cyber policy, or even their basic E&O insurance might exclude things like client data loss. So, when it comes to things like workers' comp and auto insurance, those type of policies are regulated. It doesn't matter, what insurance carrier you're with. If you total your 3-year-old Honda, they're going to pay the value of that 3-year-old Honda. But when it comes to E&O policies and cyber E&O policies, this is still, it's not a market like medical malpractice. It's been around for over 100 years. Policies are unregulated. So some carriers are going to cover certain things, and other carriers are going to stay away or exclude those coverages. So I kind of wanted to focus on some common claims and exclusions that we see from clients when they're switching over to us, and just things you want to be careful of, because we've had, again, probably, 30, 40, 50 people when they come over to us, that they're coming to us because they've gotten hit with some sort of exclusion or some sort of insuring agreement that wasn't in their policy. And these are kind of the 5 most common. So the first one's going to be client data loss. In terms of the frequency of claims, I would say that, of our 1,100 clients, this is the number one claim that we see per year. In terms of size of claims, I would say that the network security are the most expensive, but the frequency of claims is definitely client data loss. I'm going to share with you just 2 exclusions that that we've seen in policies. And these two carriers, this is going to be carrier A, I'm going to call it, but these two carriers are pretty prevalent, and you know, they work a lot with kind of local insurance agents that also insure landscapers, bakeries, home and autos, what I would call maybe generalists. And this first one, you know, a gentleman had come to us, and he was out of Kentucky, and he had sent us over a denial letter from an insurance carrier. And what had happened was ransomware had encrypted a server that they were responsible for, and most of the data from the offsite backup was restored, but not all of it was. I think they were missing like 2 or 3 months worth. And they were sued because they did not provide the adequate backup. So when this MSP went to turn in the claim, you know, after the due diligence on the carrier side, they sent him a letter and explaining why they were going to deny the claim. And the first bullet point on why they were denying the claim was they said that they were not responsible for, and I'll just read you the first sentence, loss, corruption, or destruction of content and or your failure to ensure the backup of content. So, I mean, a lot of people on this call are going to look at, you know, reports and that sort of stuff. I mean, you're not actually going to perform a test restore. But, you know, with this type of exclusion on your policy, unless you can guarantee the backup's 100% working, they're not going to pay the claim. So now, luckily for this individual or this company, you know, the claim was only, and I say only, it was only like $27,000, and it wasn't, you know, $227,000, but still, he was a little irked and irritated. The next one I'm going to show you, again, a very popular carrier. They have this exclusion in their policy, and this is just a flat out, you know, forget backups. They're just saying here that they will not repair, correct, replace, reproduce, or restore, you know, any sort of data or information as you know, you can see they're highlighted, information of any type as it relates to your professional services. So in our industry, I mean, this is just a clear-cut client data loss exclusion. I mean, they are not going to, if you get sued and there's cost to, you know, correct or replace or reproduce information of any type, this carrier is not going to sit on it. So, you know, again, if you guys are out there and you're performing backups for your clients, which, you know, I'm sure that number on this call might be 100%, you know, these are two exclusions that you got to be mindful of, because like I said, the number one claim that we see has to do with some sort of, you know, client data loss. The second thing is, you know, making sure that, you know, in the event that you have a network security failure, that you have full first and third party cyber coverages. So what do I mean by first and third? You know, this is an example of another client that had come to us and they said, hey, we've got E&O insurance and, you know, cyber E&O insurance. And, you know, if you look at it, there was like 3, I guess, policy forms to pick from, 3 coverages to pick from. You know, the first one is here, the second column's here, and the third column's here. But at the bottom, you can see under first party coverages here, you know, on this first column where the, you know, the asterisks and the NA, I mean, this just isn't available, and then optional on the other 2. So, you know, that cyber extortion example I just gave you, if you happen to be with this carrier, and again, we see a lot of people when they switch over, for example, to our Techrug program, a lot of people come from this carrier, but they had no cyber extortion expenses. So for that situation that just happened to our client on Monday, you know, for the $73,000 that they wanted, this carrier would have excluded that. So that's what I mean. You need a full first and third party coverage. So when I say first party, that's going to protect your MSP business. When I say third party, that's going to protect you against clients turning in claims against you as it results to a negligence in your professional services. So this kind of gives you an idea of that. One thing I wanted to point out was, you know, we had seen another denial from you know, a popular national carrier where there was a breach of information. It was on the West Coast, and there was it was I think $4.1 million in notification costs, and the carrier had originally paid that. However, upon further research, what they found out was they had sent them over an application, and during the application process, they asked them, "Do you do due diligence on all your vendors, and do you know, install and apply security and software updates, releases, and patches?" And the way it read was like for every version available. So I guess with, you know, in regards to that first question mark, due diligence on vendors, I mean, if you guys are working with, you know, I don't know, Microsoft and, you know, some of these huge companies, you know, how are you going to do due diligence on the vendors? I mean, if you want to go in there and you want to do an audit on them, they're not going to let you through the front door. So I don't know how anybody on this call could comply with that. And then secondly, with, you know, the installation and updates, releases, and patches, if you're running version 1.1 and version 1.2 comes out of the weekend, and you don't upgrade that, I mean, I think a lot of people on this call, will whitelist or they'll wait a couple weeks to make sure that all the bugs are worked out. This carrier is saying, well, if you don't take your client from 1.1 to 1.2, we're not going to pay the claim. So, again, kind of a crummy thing to do. They ended up, asking that company back, and they wanted their $4.1 million back, and they went to court over it, and the two sued each other. So I didn't keep up where it ended up, but still, if you've got an exclusion in there that says, hey, if you don't do due diligence on your vendors and you don't take your clients or update, the antivirus or the firewall from version 1.1 to 1.2, this particular carrier said that they're not going to pay any claims as it relates to that. The third thing that I wanted to point out was a rogue employee. Again, this summer, I can tell you we had a client that had an employee, and they didn't change the passwords on the backups fast enough, and they let him go. And I think it was, I don't know if it was a day, maybe a day and a half. But anyways, this particular employee had erased data on the backup, and there was one of the clients was a 7-office dermatologist, and this dermatology clinic was actually backed by a VC, and at the time they were going through and they were getting loans and stuff like that for the growth, and this 7-office dermatology clinics, they were shut down for like 10 days. They ended up suing our clients because it affected their loan, they said. They obviously lost business, but they sued the client for $1.6 million. And, listen, we all think we've got good employees, right? But, the minute that somebody feels like that their, house payments in jeopardy or their car payments in jeopardy, people just act differently. And so we've seen, a bunch of rogue employees over the last couple of years. I don't know if something's in the water, but making sure that you've got rogue employee coverage is going to be, extremely important. The third thing that I want to touch upon here is breach of contract. 85% of the claims that we see include breach of contract, some sort of, again, they're alleging, usually when we get in a lawsuit, it'll allege 4 or 5 things, but one of those 4 or 5 things is going to be breach of contracts. So it's pretty staggering, but 85% of the claims that we see include that. And again, we've seen it where, and everybody would be subject to this if this happened to them. If you're hired to perform a backup and for some reason, that backup, not everything's there, and you have in the contract that you were going to perform that backup and you didn't, they're going to sue you for breach of contract. So making sure that you've got breach of contract in there is again, probably the 4th most important thing that we see in terms of claims. And the last thing I just wanted to touch upon was vendor coverage. We've started seeing more and more carriers when clients are coming to us and they'll share applications that they filled out with their carriers. We'll start to see the carriers asking these questions about the MSP's vendor. So I brought this up here, and if you look at it, the third column here, written contract in place, yes or no. Again, I imagine most of the times if you're working with a vendor, you're going to have a written contract in place. But this 4th column is really the one that concerns me. Is are you able to contractually recover from direct losses arising from the failure of their services, including a data breach? So if you go to one of your vendors and you ask them to indemnify you, and you pursue this, again, in my experience, they're going to tell you, go pound salt. They're not going to do it, right? So I don't know how any of our MSPs would be able to comply with that 4th column. And we just had one, I think it was 2.5 years ago, where an RMM, a BDR security software vendor, they had used a generic account across all client servers, and they used the same password for all, and the credentials were leaked and many servers were hacked. And I'll never forget, it was like a Sunday, I think it was in August. And I got my phone lit up with 15 emails right away, because once the vendor sent that out to the MSPs, they all of a sudden said, hey, are we covered for this? Now, thank God, only one of our clients was truly impacted. But if this situation were to happen to you guys and you aren't able to contractually recover from this vendor and you checked yes, you're going to be in trouble with the carrier. They're probably going to deny the claim and say, hey, you told us you were able to recover. If you check no, we've had clients report back to us when they came over that the insurance carrier wouldn't provide coverage for them. So again, these are just a couple of things, 5 important coverages that we see come in on a regular basis that I wanted to make sure that you were protected. The first one being, client data loss. The second one being network security failures, making sure that you got full first and third party cyber liability E&O insurance. You're making sure that you've got coverage for a rogue employee, breach of contract. And then they just make sure, everyone's using a vendor here. Make sure that if you give your information to that vendor and something happens to that vendor while that data is in their care, custody, and control, that the insurance carrier isn't going to try to deny the claim. And before I turn it back over to Amber and Sarah, these are things that I just kind of wanted to bring up just to be mindful of and pay attention to. Reporting issues. Once in a while we'll see reporting issues where MSPs are aware of a circumstance that might lead to a claim and hasn't led to a claim, but it might lead to a claim. And if you guys are aware of that, make sure that you're communicating that to your insurance carrier. We call it a notice of circumstance. It's not like it's a black mark or anything against you, but you want to make sure that you're being transparent with them, because what will happen is if you're aware of something, let's say you renew on January 1st, and you're aware of something in May, and you go through the renewal process in January, and you fill out the application and say, well, you aren't aware of anything, and you check that box, and then you renew on January, and let's say in March, all of a sudden, the incident back in May comes to fruition, and you try to turn in a claim in March, the policy period's already renewed. And there's provisions in your policy that say if you're aware of something, you got to report it to the carrier. And if it goes past the renewal period, they may void coverage. And then the second thing you could run into is a material misrepresentation where you checked on the application that you weren't aware of anything when perhaps you were. So it doesn't cost you anything, but if you're just aware of something, somebody sends you either a threatening email or something like you see something that potentially might lead to something else, I would notify the carrier. The other thing is a lot of these carriers now are including cyber crime on your E&O policy, which is great, but you want to make sure that you understand that crime insurance, while it protects your MSP business from if you guys get socially engineered or tricked in, send in money, it doesn't protect you from your clients stealing from your employees. And we've seen cases of that. Again, I'm not going to say a lot, but we've seen cases over the last several years where MSP's clients, whether it's banking, routing, account information, physical property, they're taking from their clients. So just having cybercrime and relying that on your E&O policy, to me, it's not the best way to deal with the issue. You want to look at a true crime policy. If anybody on here, I don't know if you use a maid service or something, or if you've seen vans driving around for maid companies, but you'll see that it says insured and bonded. So the insured means that they got insurance. If they knock over your vase or something like that, they'll replace the vase. But the bonded portion means that if their employees steal your Rolex or steal something from your house, then they have insurance that will compensate you with that. So, we've seen, again, crime. A lot of people will look at it and say, oh, I've got cyber crime, but it doesn't address that third party component where if your employees steal from your clients. And then the last thing I'll leave in, I'll turn it over to Amber, is, just making sure that your that your clients have cyber insurance, because a lot of your clients will think that, hey, listen, XYZ MSP handles all of our IT needs, therefore we don't need cyber. And if you were to look at, and there's the cyber claims studies out there, Net Diligence does one, Verizon does one, there's several companies that do it. But the latest one I saw from Net Diligence, 43% of the claims that got turned into the insurance industry were from hacks, malware, and viruses, things that you're probably being hired to protect your clients in your E&O policy. But 57% of the claims that get turned into the insurance industry are things like, a staff mistake. Let's say you represent a law firm or you're working with a law firm. If they have, a staff mistake that leads to the theft or disclosure of PHI or PII, a rogue employee could exist, lost or stolen laptops. So 57% of the claims that we see would be outside of, your E&O type situation where you're responsible for protecting their networks. Plus, a lot of times you guys are monitoring or not monitoring, home devices. And so, if they log in and they introduce, some sort of ransomware into the system from an unmonitored home PC, that's not a you problem, that's a them problem. So, just stressing the importance of cyber for your clients is again, another, I think, important thing, because a lot of your clients are looking to you to fill kind of that CIO role. And so, recommending that they have a strong cyber policy with the cyber crime would be something that I would just pass along. And with that being said, Amber, hope I didn't take up too much time, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Justin. And absolutely not. I'm sure that many people got their questions answered. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll I had mentioned earlier. So if everyone could just take a moment, and I think it's only 4 questions, just help us improve our future webinars. And in the meantime, if you have any questions for Justin while we still have him on the line that you would like to talk about a bit more, please submit them to the chat panel or to the questions panel, and we'll do what we can to answer them. There was a question as to whether the slide deck will be shared. Today's webinar was recorded, and we will be distributing that recording afterwards in the next 24 to 48 hours. So again, if anyone has any questions, and Justin, I just want to thank you again. I think we can all agree insurance, kind of becomes this kind of scary monster when we don't fully understand it and know what to look for. So, and that's in any case, not just with, MSP businesses. So I think everything you talked about today can really help us prepare better.
Well, thanks.
Okay, so we do have a few questions coming in. The first one is asking if this applies to Canada as well, or if everything we kind of went over today is more centered in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, the insuring agreements and how I use them, it doesn't matter Canada, U.S., I would say those 5 things you want to make sure, again, in terms of like, the regulatory environment up there, or, different terminology, like we might call something network security and they might call it, something different. But, if you were to pass along to an agent and say, hey, these are the 5 things I want to make sure, that A, I'm protected for, and B, I don't have these exclusions, I think that they would be able to answer your questions.
Okay. And then we do have another question, more specific to Techrug itself. How long does it generally take to get started with the Techrug program?
Yeah, so we've got an application. It's 2 pages, and then we've got a risk assessment, which maybe is a little bit different than what most carriers will look to do. So we do take our clients through a risk assessment. I would say it's like a watered down version of NIST, or kind of like I don't know, mini security trust mark or something like that. But I would say, in order, again, I don't know if I'm supposed to promote services or whatever, Amber, here, but if you are interested in the Techrug program, to complete everything to get a quote, I would say it takes you maybe 10 to 12 minutes.
And we have another question again on Techrug and Canada. Is Techrug available in Canada?
Yeah, we looked this summer, and it's something I promise you we're going to do. It's just from a licensing standpoint and a cost standpoint, we're just not there yet. We did look at it. I think when my staff looked, I hope I'm not wrong when I say this, but I think there were like 5 provinces, and we had to get licensed in each province, and the cost, I don't know, somewhere like $10,000 or $15,000 for like each province. So it's way more than it is in the U.S. I think, for what one province is, it's for all of the U.S. So right now we're not there, but we hope to be there in the not too distant future. And one other thing, Amber, if I could say, one other thing when I mentioned about the contracts, if you are a Techrug client, we give all of our clients access to a free MSA and statement of work. So it was reviewed by our coverage attorneys, as well as we hired local counsel to just go through it. So it mirrors our E&O policy form. So again, if there's, and I don't think we have any major exclusions, but if there's an exclusion like electrical, mechanical disturbances, that's not going to be covered on any E&O policy. So what I mean by that, like if power, or I live in Columbus, Ohio, so I'll just use here as an example, we get ice, especially this morning, that could take down power lines. And if the power goes down and the power company comes out and re-engages the power, and for some reason, the antivirus or the firewall doesn't click on, and let's say, the office manager for your client comes in the next morning, gets some sort of malware, and they're shut down for 3 or 4 days, and they try to come at you, no E&O policy is going to cover electrical and mechanical disturbances. So that's something like in our contract, we were able to put in there that, if you have a client signing it, that talks about you aren't responsible for electrical and mechanical disturbances. So, it's a $5,000 to $7,000 perk or benefit, but we give the access to that to all of our clients in MSA and statement of work.
Excellent. So we do have another question, specifically surrounding VoIPs, VoIP. Is there any issue with Techrug and the coverage for companies that offer VoIP services? Because there's one person here who had a company turn them down for coverage, specifically because they offered VoIP services.
Yeah, and to answer your question, we do have VoIP clients, but there would be additional underwriting questions, and without knowing, the makeup of this particular company, I wouldn't be able to answer, yes or no. But we do insure VoIP companies, but some of them can be kind of high hazard, and we don't really have the appetite for that type of risk.
Okay. So it's really more of a case-by-case basis.
Exactly. I mean, I would say, again, just to fill out so we've got a questionnaire, we've got the risk assessment. If you just fill out a questionnaire and it's something you're interested in, and that, Amber, I don't know on your site what they do or don't have access to. If you want me to, I could send you the questionnaire when we hang up. But it's 2 pages. So, I mean, it takes, I don't know, 7 minutes to complete just the questionnaire. It might be worth to send it in, and then we can send you the additional questions. And then based on that, it goes to our underwriting team, and they would give us a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Absolutely. You can send me that after the webinar, and we'll make sure to distribute it with the recording.
Okay. Thanks, Amber.
And looks like we have one last question here. If a client uses another provider for network security as their vendor, what would our accountability be?
Okay, sorry. What was that question one more time? If our client,
if our client uses another provider for their network security vendor,
gotcha,
what would our accountability be?
Okay, so I think what they're asking is this particular MSP does, part of the IT services work, and then they've got another vendor that does the other stuff. If that's the correct question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would say that you're only responsible. I mean, I don't know, for you, I don't want to say it's dangerous, right? But if something does go wrong, I imagine both of those MSPs are going to get sued. I don't know, maybe one of the things is you could, just check with your E&O carrier and say, hey, would you prefer that we do both? And then I would just approach that client and say, hey, in order to make sure that our E&O properly protects, us and you in case something goes wrong, and use it as a selling point or a wedge, and just say that we need to, to control that network security portion. But yeah, I would imagine, again, if a claim gets turned in, you're going to be responsible for what you did, and they're going to be responsible for what they did. And if you are recommending something that you think and it bleeds over in kind of to what the network security vendor is doing, again, I would go back and make sure that you're getting some sort of waiver letter or denial of service letter signed just to protect you. And just to let you know, Amber, a lot of people too, one thing I forgot to mention, a lot of people think that E&O insurance, cyber E&O insurance has to be, or it is expensive. And that's just, it's not the case. It doesn't have to be that expensive. I know in working with some of the Barracuda community members, I mean, these are really well-run companies, and carriers are excited to get, B+ and A-rated MSPs. So, if you would consider your MSP in that bucket of B+ or A-rated, I don't know, $1.5 million client might pay, $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a year. You don't have to pay $4,000 for cyber E&O insurance. And if you are paying that, with the savings, you can look to plug other holes like we talked about. You can get crime and advertise that you're bonded. I think that's a huge selling point because, right now a lot of our MSPs are looking for differentiating factors. And I can tell you that if you take $1 million or $1.5 million MSP, heck, even a $5 million MSP, a majority of them don't have the crime. And I know years past our MSPs would advertise that they got cyber E&O. And listen, a lot of MSPs now have cyber E&O. That's not a selling point anymore. I think the selling point now might be to say, hey, we're insured and bonded. And then if they ask, well, what's that mean by bonded? Well, hey, if any of your information gets stolen, or if we're banking, routing, account information, we've got insurance to compensate you. We've had our clients use that as a selling point, and they've been able to pick up business because then it creates, when that client goes back to their current MSP and says, hey, are you bonded? And they say, well, no, or what's that, or we're not. Then it creates some doubt, like, well, what else don't they have? So that might be something that again, if you save money on your E&O, you can go out and purchase, that additional crime insurance, and you can use it as not only to protect your company, but use it as a selling tool.
And Justin, just because I'm getting a couple more questions focusing around the form you talked about, the application, do you know the website off the top of your head, like where specifically on the website you can go to fill out the form?
On ours or?
On yours, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you just go to techrug.com, so techrug.com, you'll see that there's a button there to click on to fill out the questionnaire. With that being said, I think we just updated it. So, Amber, the other thing I could do is, like I said, I could send you the most recent one because I know that they're updating. We just got approval, back in the last week of December. We just changed a few questions. So if you want the most up to date, but it's still, we can work off the one that if you submit on the website. If not, when we hang up, Amber, I can send you over the most recent questionnaire.
Definitely, and I'll definitely take it and make sure it gets distributed. And looks like we have one more question we have time for, and then I'm going to close this out. So somebody's asking, would your company be willing to analyze current insurance and compare with your services? So
sure.
Sort of a compare contrast.
Yeah, absolutely.